I mean to take it all no matter what you say. Then it'll be over my dead body, Patrick, replied the smaller of the two men. Aye, and that too, if needs be. O'Malley turned and made to leave, but as he did Dunbar grabbed him from behind. His strong hands clamped together circling the other's chest in a bear-like grip, pinning O'Malley's arms to his side. He struggled, trying to throw Edwin off, but Dunbar wouldn't be. His height, though it was lesser, was compensated by his broad shoulders and strong body. The strength in his muscles, accumulated over years of labor in the goldfields and mines following that, was too great for him to be dislodged easily. O'Malley was forced to drop the hessian sack he carried, its contents spilling noisily over the stone slab floor. Despite O'Malley's best effort, Dunbar hung on, squeezing, trying to crush the life out of the man he had once called friend. He couldn't breathe and could feel his consciousness slipping away. There was barely enough movement left in his wrist to reach to the Bowie knife strapped to his hip, but enough. Slipping out of its sheath unseen by either man, the curved blade glistened, reflecting the yellow flame of the kerosene lantern that lit the chamber. Then Dunbar saw it in the corner of his eye. He tried to move out of reach, but it was all too late, for in the time it took for the steel tip to move from its rawhide cover to being thrust deeply into the side of his abdomen, was no more than a passing second. Edwin screamed in pain, releasing his hold and standing for a moment, both hands clutching the bone handle of the still embedded knife. O'Malley spun and grabbed hold of the handle, above the other's clenched fingers. With a brutal thrust he forced the sharp blade even deeper in. Dunbar grunted and his knees gave way. He looked up in shock and disbelief at his once friend. O'Malley stared down with hate that seemed to have no bounds. A cruel smile creased Patrick's face. Such a smile that if Dunbar had thought some fragment of pity remained, it vanquished that last hope. It was a spiteful, bitter smile, the look of one who knew they have one, and yet felt no compassion. Dunbar was already too weak to stop O'Malley. He still stood, partly supported by the blade that they both held, until O'Malley drew both their hands across the soft flesh of his victim's stomach. Dunbar's blood pulsed out amongst his entrails, exposed through the dreadful wound. Die, Edwin, O'Malley snarled. My world is a better place at your passing. Dunbar teetered on failing legs, as O'Malley let go the knife and roughly pushed him away. Edwin tumbled back against the wall, standing for an instant, before his legs finally gave under him, and he slid down, back braced against the cold rock. "'Tis time we parted company, Edwin," O'Malley announced almost casually, kneeling down gathering the dull yellow items from the stone floor. "This time, for good." He spoke without the slightest trace of emotion, as finally he picked up the kerosene lantern. The words bounced around in Dunbar's mind, drawing him to their sound, though now he could barely see Patrick through rapidly clouding eyes. After all this time, and all that they had been through, he was being left to die alone. There was little strength left, but enough in those dying moments to pull the tiny pistol from the holster tucked inside his shirt. It was to have been a gift to the woman he loved, something for protection in the rough townships. It was Derringer's latest, the Remington, and at .41 caliber almost useless in a gunfight, but it was deadly at close range. Edwin could barely see. Moisture and darkness filled his eyes. Guided almost by instinct, he raised the stubby barrel towards the vague shadow, silhouetted in the receding lantern light. Strange, he thought, his face taking on a faint smile. How things change. Then violent recoil threw his lifeless body against the wall. There were several shoe boxes in the bottom of the old wardrobe. The first two held documents and Daniel placed them aside. He would go through these later, one at a time to make sure there was nothing important. It seemed unlikely, he thought, as he reached for the third box. All her life his grandmother had been incurable hoarder, and now she had passed away, it was down to the family to take care of her things. Daniel was regretting that he hadn't been quick enough to think of other places he needed to be when he had been asked to choose what was and what was not to keep. Then he hadn't given much thought about what would be kept and what would be discarded. It had seemed simple: spend a couple of hours and conscience clear, he could get on with more important stuff. That was before he realized that to the woman, this scrap and jumble had at some time been precious mementos. The truth was, though, that even if he felt forced into the unpleasant task of disposing of the woman's possession, he, above all his family, did have a fascination with ancestry, and would likely be the one to recognize what should be saved. He forced his mind to the task. Being the self-appointed keeper of the family's history, it was his task to decide what was relevant, but there was precious little up to now, as the third box confirmed. But knowing a hasty discarding could end up being regretted, this too he placed with the others. He reached for the fourth box, thinking how he and Gran had slowly grown apart as he grew into adulthood. It wasn't a pleasant thought, and he wished now he had realized that the superficial things that occupy our daily lives had taken over his, and relegated her. He would make it up to his mother, at least he would try and remember to. He opened the fourth box to more papers, and as he did he saw underneath, hidden until he moved the box, a small book. It took only moments to recognize it, and his breath froze as memory engulfed him. "Thank you. Thank you very much," he remembered saying as he looked back over his shoulder at the red-haired shopkeeper, now ushering him toward the door. The man sidestepped, pushing the handle down and pulling it, causing the bell to ring, bouncing erratically about its coiled spring. Then he was outside into the noise of late afternoon traffic. The door closed behind him, and he saw the old man slip the bolt across from the timber jamb, locking it shut. The calloused fingertips rubbing briefly against the dirty glass, turning the little cardboard sign over, before the man walked away to disappear into the darkness at the rear of the shop. Daniel stood for a moment, his eyes transfixed on the little white sign with the black letters closed, as it swung in diminishing arcs like a playground swing. He had no idea what had made him go inside the decrepit second-hand bookshop. It was nothing but pure luck that he had even seen the place, set back behind the old timber gate, nestled where it was, between a motor panel works, smelling heavily of acetone, and a plumber's warehouse. Portsmouth was not an area he knew well. In fact, Daniel had never intended to come anywhere near the industrial area, and wouldn't have done, if it hadn't been for that all-timed meeting. He had been at the school's athletics carnival at Barlow Park, when Dwayne and Frankie had cornered him. Two of the most unsociable people he knew of, or he guessed anyone else knew of. It seemed Dwayne's main pleasure in life seemed to be in making Daniel's miserable. He had no idea why the bully had chosen him to harass, but he took every opportunity to do so. Dwayne's latest act of fun was to call him after the name of a song the choir had sung 2 weeks ago at the school concert. It was titled Danny Boy. Dwayne had sneered that a little Welsh kid should like it. He was referring the fact that Daniel's engineer father had emigrated from Wales. He ignored the fact that Daniel had been born in Cairns, and had lived here for the 15 years since. Daniel knew he should face up to Dwayne, but he just never seemed to have the courage when he needed it. And as usual he had run off, intending this time to take the long way round to the bus terminal, that way he could avoid meeting them again. Then he had got lost. But like it or not, now he had them to thank for his stroke of incredible good fortune. He looked down unbelievably at the old leather-bound book clutched in his hand. His eyes going over, for the 100th time, the embossed title. Engraved in gold letters it pronounced needlepoint. Advanced, Book 3 foot. It seemed funny thinking how long Mom, and Gran before her, had been searching for a copy of the book he held. It was out of print and had been for many years. His parents long ago had given up trying to find a copy that they could give to Gran as a present for her birthday, or Christmas. All that searching just for this, he mumbled. It looked the most boring book he had ever seen. But Mom had told them that Gran had numbers 1 and 2, and that together it was the first book that she had ever owned. So they had kept looking. He smiled to himself. It was then, while he was dreaming, that he heard the voice. Immediately his dream world dissolved into a reality of the worst kind. Well, if it isn't little Danny boy. Looking up he saw it was Dwayne, and his thug of a mate crossing the road toward him. His biggest adversary, and big was the right name for him, but not as in tall, but as in gross. Whether it was muscle of just plain fat that made him the size he was, neither Daniel nor anyone else had dared to try finding out. Frankie, his mate, was the complete opposite. Thin. He looked as if he hadn't eaten in a month, tall with a swarthy complexion. It was rumored that he always carried a knife. "What you got there?" The unkempt boy grasped the corner of the book with fat grubby fingers. Daniel held on. "Give it here," Dwayne snarled threateningly. It was no use and Daniel let go. "I don't like smart kids," Dwayne sneered. "Always got their snotty faces in some book or needlepoint," he said aloud. Daniel was surprised. He didn't think Dwayne could read, even though he was long past 17, and still at school, due to having had to repeat at least 1 grade. The amusing thought was short-lived. Needlepoint. "What's that?" Dwayne repeated it even louder this time. "Sewing," smirked Frankie. "Danny boy's going to learn to sew buttons on his dresses." "He's what?" grunted Dwayne, beginning to laugh. "Sewing. Who's got a new hobby then?" "Need to learn how to sew a dress." "Shut up, Dwayne," thought Daniel, "you're so thick." "That'd be right. I always knew you liked to wear girls' clothes." Dwayne slung the book to the other youth, then looked back at Daniel. "I told you to go get me a drink, Danny boy. Where is it?" "I said I only brought enough money for my own lunch, Dwayne." He felt himself cowering. No matter how hard he tried, he just lost all his confidence before the bully. "That don't worry me none." "Then give us what you've got and I'll buy my own." "But I've..." Frankie had been thumbing through the book, now he suddenly interrupted them. "Hey! The kid's bought a dud, here, look." Dwayne turned away from Daniel, and took the offered pages, then laughed out loud. They both looked at him, grinning across their faces. "Have a good time reading patterns. If you can," taunted Dwayne, throwing the book to the ground. Still laughing, they walked away. Daniel stooped down and picked it up. He brushed the sticky black gravel off, and opened it puzzled. At first he found nothing wrong. There were diagrams, pictures, instructions. Then a great wedge of pages flicked through his fingers. He went back. His heart stopped. They were right, it was useless. A whole section of the book, between pages 43 to 66, were stuck together. Not just pressed together by age, they were solid, a thick slab of paper. He could have cried with disappointment. For a moment he sank to the depths of depression. It had been a lie to Dwayne when Daniel told him there was only enough money for his lunch. He had, when he left home, most of his pay from helping at the corner store in his pocket. It was supposed to have gone into his bank account, but that was before he had paid over half of it for the book. He thought about going back to knock on the glass door, ask for his money back, but he remembered the shop would be dark and silent. Dejectedly he made his way to the bus, and home. Daniel looked back onto the floor of the wardrobe. There were no other books. He knew she had others, but where? His heart sank as he realized Gran had just taken his gift and hidden it away. Diana was sprawled on the lounge, watching a music video program when Daniel came through the back door. "Is that you, Mom?" she called, her eyes still glued to the plasma screen. "No," he replied gloomily, hardly trying to complete with the twang of some electronically enhanced instrument. Her voice lost enthusiasm. Oh, it's you. Mom's not back yet. I can see that. You wouldn't have that on as loud, if she was. Diana unfolded her legs and crossed to the set, turning the volume down. And what's put you in a bad mood? Nothing. Nothing. Then I'd hate to see you when something had. She saw he was trying to hide something under his sport shirt. What's that? What's what? That under. It's a book. What you hiding a book for? She sounded disappointed. It's from school, Daniel said as casually as he could. Now Diana was intrigued. Her brother was trying to hide something. It had to be interesting. No, it's not. You weren't at school today, you were at Barlow Park? Leave me alone, it's nothing, it's just a book. Let me see? No. Diana was coming over to him. Daniel turned for his room. She was a year older than him, and was almost his size. He moved for the door as she lunged over the back of the couch. Let me see it, she giggled at his obvious reluctance. Diana grabbed for it, her fingers gripping corner. Let me see it, she shrieked in laughter. No. She lifted her foot and stamped down his shin. Daniel stumbled. That hurt, he cried out in discomfort, momentarily releasing his grip, allowing her to pull it from his hands. Sorry, Daniel, she said less than convincingly, turning her back to him, elbows spread out, so that he couldn't reach around. Needlepoint, she said in curiosity, before realizing its significance. That's the book Gran wants? Yes, I know that. I thought it was a dirty one. Well, it isn't. Then what were you hiding it for? I was going to. But she wasn't listening. It's all stuck together, she interrupted. I know, he said through clenched teeth. What did you buy it for? It's all stuck together. It's no good. I didn't know it was all stuck together when I bought it, did I? Daniel said defensively. Anyway, it's not all stuck together, just a few pages, Gran can read the rest. Daniel knew she probably hadn't, instead Gran has hidden it away so he wouldn't be hurt. His reaction was almost bodily painful, but as the thought entered his mind it was immediately rejected. If she had, why hadn't she just put it with the other books, and hidden it in plain sight? The reason was more obvious, it wasn't meant to be hidden, it was here to be found. The more he thought the more sense it made. A book on a shelf would be treated like a book and really would be hidden in plain sight. A book that was hidden was a challenge to be found. It made perfect sense without making any sense at all. Daniel looked again at the book and opened it to the preface page. An idea had come to him that there would be, but there was no message. He checked the following pages but there were no notes, nor anything inserted. He flicked through the pages until he came to the bonded section. It began at page 37 and the book became loose at page 72. He was baffled. For a while he was sure, for some unknown reason, Gran had left him a message. Dejectedly he put the book on top of the boxes. Daniel did his duty, and his duty all came down to 4 piles. By far the largest he thought of as not required. He couldn't bring himself to say what it really was, rubbish. The second was to share, the things of Gran's that would be distributed around family as reminders of her. The third were things that would become history, her part in the lineage that would continue on, and the fourth he termed possibles, things that had yet to be determined. In the fourth group was the book, and with the rest of the group it would wait until he had time to keep or discard. Frankie was getting nervous. He hated it when Dwayne took his time. Wasn't the whole idea, quick in, quick out, but no, Dwayne insisted in doing a thorough job. Since when had burglary been something you were thorough at? He needed a cigarette, but Dwayne didn't want him to do anything that drew passerbys' attention. He was sitting on a trail bike, in the shadows. Didn't that already draw attention? Do do that, it was like being back at school, but school didn't pay like thieving. He grunted, he really needed a smoke. So maybe it wasn't so bad doing what Dwayne said, and anyway Dwayne had always been able to get him to do whatever Dwayne wanted. Even after school, when he had the chance at uni. Maybe he could have become an engineer instead of a mechanic. Still, playing with engines wasn't as bad as a brickie. He wouldn't want to lug those concrete blocks around all day like Dwayne. Still, lugging blocks had changed Dwayne, it had really changed him. Now he had muscles growing on his muscles. Frankie wished he had muscles like Dwayne. If he had, then maybe the girls would fight each other for him instead of Dwayne. He tried to think of which one worked in the motel, but there were so many, all eager to give Dwayne a tip-off. Some dude splashing cash around, or with an expensive camera or phone. "He's going out at 6 and won't be back till 8, she'd say, hoping Dwayne would be pleased and reward her with his company. Frankie suddenly became alert as a figure came out of the motel's back entrance. A slight feeling of panic made him tingle as he turned on the bike's engine. What would happen if it didn't start? But it would, he was a really good mechanic. Frankie eased the throttle. Dwayne didn't like him to rev it. Revving drew attention. Frankie offered the helmet to Dwayne as he straddled the motorcycle's seat behind him. "Go." The word was abrupt and threatening. Frankie did as he always did, and obeyed Dwayne. Daniel slid out of bed, his mind in panic. He didn't know why. He knew there was no physical reason, but the feeling of urgency wouldn't leave. There was something he needed to do and he didn't know what. In the dream it had been perfectly clear, he had done something that had needed doing, but what was it? His mind searched back. Before the dream was last night, and all he had done was watch television. The news, the weather, and some chick movie he had simply been too lazy to switch off. Before that there was work, the drive home, dinner, takeaway pizza, with double cheese. That was probably the why, but what was the what? Somehow the movie wouldn't go away and he went to the computer and called up a film review. It was the usual stuff: girl meets boy, girl and boy fight, girl gets jealous when she finds a letter. His finger froze as he remembered the what. The image of the girl, the letter, and the cloud of steam merged with his memory. "It's a bit of a shame though. Maybe we could steam them open?" "Steam them?" Daniel said nervously. "Hold it over boiling water. Remember that letter that Mom opened last year?" He did. She had been really embarrassed when they had walked in on her. "Yeah, that should work," Susie said. "Loosen up all the pages and Gran will be real pleased with us for finding this." "Us? I'm your sister, you're not going to take all the credit, are you?" It was still dark as Daniel made his way silently into the kitchen. He filled the hot water jug and waited. It seemed to take hours before slowly, steam issued from the spout. As it did, he carefully placed the book at the edge of the scalding mist. Then with a click the jug turned off, and the steam dwindled away. He started it again, this time propping the jug against a vase, pressing the cutout button down. Holding the book by the corner, he could feel the rapidly increasing heat on his fingers. He held it as long as he could before laying it open on the bench to start peeling away the first page. But it and the rest were still stuck solid. Daniel put it back into the steam. He tried again and again, but neither of the corners would lift, not at all. It was as if all the pages had been glued together. It was as that thought struck him, that he became aware of something different. The individual pages next to the sealed section were wet and soft, while the edges of the stuck pages were still stiff and coated with a thin layer of condensed water. But a couple of centimeters in from the edge of the page they too became wet and pliable. Not only that, the paper had become a light yellow color, as if it had aged. Looking closer he saw that it wasn't the page that was a different color. It was because the paper was becoming transparent. Quickly he turned over the wedge. Here on the other side it seemed like a normal page. Daniel placed this side over the steam. The same thing happened. The edges stayed white and firm, yet the middle became soft and yellow. Excitedly he held the stuck pages up towards the ceiling light, and saw the glow through it. Now he was sure. The book had been hollowed out. He put the book on the kitchen bench and used the hot water to make a cup of tea. He really needed a cup of tea to slow down his heartbeat. Daniel opened the top drawer of the cabinet. There was a jumble of screwdrivers, shifters, and somewhere, hidden amongst his tools was the hobby knife he had bought for some job or other. Pushing everything from one side to the other impatiently, he could barely contain himself any longer. At last he found it, buried in his haste, underneath everything else. He drew back the protective cover, exposing the small but extremely sharp blade, and picked up the book. The pages had dried, but they now felt thicker and stiffer than they had before. There was no indication where the hollowing out, if it really was hollow, started. He made a guess and gently pushed the point in. He had expected the point to push in easily and was surprised that it took a force to penetrate the paper, but once the cut was made the knife slipped through effortlessly. He carefully pulled the blade up the page, following, he hoped, the side of the cavity until a little way off the top edge the blade would cut no more. He stopped, carefully turned through a right angle, and followed the now almost certainly glued edge. His curiosity was becoming unbearable, and without finishing the cut he turned up the corner. Inside through the small opening he could see the rough edges of the cut and glued pages, and something else. Neatly fitting the hollowed space was a folded piece of paper. He let the corner fall back. His hands were trembling, his heart was thumping, his breath was rapid. Somebody had gone to a lot of trouble. Daniel forced himself to put the book down, and went back into the living area. He turned on a breakfast show and slowly drank the tea, forcing himself to calm down. He was acting like a kid. This wasn't a TV program, or something that happened to storybook characters, but a secret hiding place. Maybe it contained a message from a spy, or a hidden treasure map. He was a grown-up, stuff like that happened in childish imaginations. He forced his mind to consider the opposite, the more logical. It was probably something quite mundane, he told himself. Something like a shopping list. No, he mumbled, it couldn't be. Why on earth would anybody hide anything that wasn't important? Against his grown-up brain's insistence he knew it had to contain something exciting, it had to be. He couldn't take any disappointment, not now his hopes were so high. Daniel walked quickly back to the kitchen. Once he had completed the second cut, he made the final one across the bottom. Then slowly, he pulled the loose paper back. The hidden contents lay exposed, a piece of paper folded to the same size, and more or less the thickness of the cavity. Daniel reverently lifted it from its resting place. It felt thick and coarse in texture compared to the other pages, and it was a faded yellow color, though whether with age or dirt he couldn't tell. There was something written in one corner. It was hard to read as the ink had run slightly, probably because of his efforts with the steam. He could see that there was a date. January the 22nd, 1883. Immediately his interest in relics took over. Opening the paper he saw that it was a letter. My dearest Jenny. The bearer of this letter is a native we call Jack. He has shown me great loyalty and friendship these last months, and has vowed to deliver the book that contains this letter to you, although he is not aware of our secret communication. I ask that you treat him with kindness. Firstly, I trust that your journey up the coast has been enjoyable, and that the condition of the sea did not cause you too much concern. As we are both well aware from our past experiences, it is not unknown for periods of inclement weather at this time of year. There was another smudged section before it continued. and it is my most sincerest wish that you return to your family, and endeavor to put these last wretched years behind you, although it seems more likely as time passes, that I will be unable to join you as we had planned." The letter continued on as the writer poured out his heart to the woman who must surely have been his wife, or lover. Daniel felt a little embarrassed reading it. He put the letter down. He was sorry he had opened it now. Even after all the time passed, he felt he was invading their privacy. That was not what he had intended. He slipped the paper back inside its hiding place and got ready for work. It was late evening when he returned home and his thoughts came back to the letter. Picking it up, he began to read again. After all, he reasoned, these people would have been dead for a long time, in fact long before he was even born, and if it was only a love letter, why seal it inside the book? Who would hide away a letter anyway? He read, quickly skimming the intimacy as if he wasn't reading the words, until he came to a paragraph that took his breath away. The endearments were gone. "As you will undoubtedly have heard talk of me in the town, in that I am sought by the authorities. I am accused of taking the bullion shipment. I shall not lie. As my maker already knows, and I now admit to you, I confess that this is the truth. Deny it to you, I cannot. Even knowing what has passed and been said between us, and that I have broken my solemn oath not to steal again. I beg your forgiveness, and in mitigation, I swear it was never my intention to go back to the old ways. But as I collected my papers from those leeches of men, Patrick convinced me of the ease by which we could relieve the bankers of their blood money. In my blind anger for revenge, and my deepest desire for us to be comfortable, I now regret that I was swayed by his persuasive argument. That being said, and because of it, I come to my second purpose in putting pen to paper. The troopers were too quick by half for us, and ensured that we would not be away too far. Although to my misery I cannot but admit a damned fine job they did, for I could leave the district, and have returned to the Fledermaus cave. It is there that I shall leave that which I bequeath to you, if things should go wrong for me. I do not wish to put temptation in your way, but by right it is mine, and by that token, yours. If you wish you can return it to the bloodsuckers, but my wishes are to see you live out your life in comfort. The choice is yours. Either way you must make haste and bring it down to port. Book passage for yourself back to Sydney town under your maiden name, and thence to Hamburg. I, God willing, will contact our good friend Braun, when I am able, and together may we spend the twilight of our years together." The last few words spoke more of his love for the woman, though the words toward the edge of the page were once more smudged and hard to read. It was signed Philip Edwin Dunbar. Daniel turned the paper over. There was a scribbled map showing a Gunter's Peak. Alongside it a cross was marked at the conjunction of two streams. But the names put to the other features shown meant nothing to him. Daniel lay back on his bed, his mind awash with ideas. Too many ideas, too many puzzles. Who was this man Dunbar? What had happened to his wife? But the third and most intriguing, if the letter was still in the book, had anyone, either Jenny, or someone else, already been to the cave? Daniel was tingling with excitement. He could not keep it a secret, but he was too afraid to tell anyone. The words glared back from the web page. They said how Eddie Dunbar was reputed to have been involved in the theft of 3 deliveries of gold dust and nugget, en route from Goldsboro to Cairns. The final one of 135 ounces occurring on the 17th February 1883, none were ever retrieved, and Dunbar himself was never captured. Daniel's hands were shaking. Was it the gold that was hidden there on Gunter's Peak? Reading on the information told that Eddie Dunbar left England sometime around 1880, but of his early years in Australia practically nothing was known. Like thousands of others, he probably came north to prospect the goldfields. There was a vague reference to him alleging that corrupt officials had cheated him out of his claim. They in turn accused him of theft. He ran from the law and turned to bushranging. It seemed Dunbar was quite a successful bushranger, but his days as an outlaw were short. Within 8 months of his first hold-up he had disappeared along with his loot. There was no record of a wife or girlfriend. More searching revealed that there was a Goldsboro track. It had been a tortuous route up the mountain range, crossing over the Mulgrave River 13 times. The supply teams traveled it up and down with armed escorts carrying the ore from the goldfields. Why he had never heard of Gunter's Peak became clear from an article he found about the First World War. The population of the settlement at the time had been enthusiastically pro-British, so when hostilities broke out all the streets or features that had names that even sounded vaguely German were changed to something less Teutonic. He had to find an early map of the gold districts. The voice at the other end of the telephone was suspicious. The Air Cadets? Daniel was losing confidence. His sister could have that effect on him. Even though their ages were almost the same, she with her strong, self-opinionated confidence, nearly always overwhelmed his. What about them? Her tone was almost challenging. Well, all those camps you've been on. With the cadets? Yes. Bivouacs. Yes, the bivouacs. That was years ago. I know. Do you think you could still find your way in the bush alone? I mean without the rest of a patrol? The assurance replaced curiosity. Daniel, that's a bit of a stupid question. Bivouacs are what it's all about. Survival training. Duh. Daniel wasn't going to be put off. Would you teach me? You? She sounded incredulous. Yes. No. Why not? It's not something you learn in 5 minutes over a cup of coffee. Oh. Her refusal wasn't a total surprise. I don't need to know everything, just the basics. The basics? What basics? I don't know, that's why I'm asking you. She laughed a little. Well, first off, there's nowhere to plug the television. He wouldn't even reply to that. I want to give it a try. Daniel, I can't tell you something knowing you're going to wander off and get lost. I'll be okay, I've bought a sat in AV. And how are you going to get a signal under the canopy? That thought hadn't even occurred to him. It's really important, sis. The curiosity had returned. You're up to something? You are always going on about what fun it was. It was, but like I said, that was years ago, and with a bunch of other cadets. You need the others? No, I don't, she said indignantly. Then don't you remember? The reply was less confident. Of course I do. Then just tell me the basics, I'll be fine. No, you won't, she hissed a moment. When? When? You mean when was I thinking of going to go? There was hesitation. Maybe this weekend. She was surprised. This weekend, that's 3 days away. So? Daniel. He could hear the lecture in her voice. Even if I did tell you 3 days isn't enough time to get everything together. All he could do was appeal to her. Look, sis, I know it sounds too quick, but that's me. You know I don't ever think things through, but it's important and I really need to know. Her reply was less harsh. Tell me why it's so important and maybe I'll tell you enough to get you back out. Susie. The scolding returned. Daniel. You have to promise you won't tell anyone. It really is a secret. The voice was harder. Daniel, what are you up to? I found a letter. His confidence failed again. Then you had better bring it with you. I'm home all day. Diana put the letter down and picked up the book, examining it carefully. You're sure it's not a joke? It was something Daniel had once thought. Truthfully, no, but why would somebody do it? And there really was an outlaw called Eddie Dunbar. He was born in Cairo, Of English parents, his father worked for the British Museum. He came out to Australia, worked on the goldfields and became a bush ranger, but he was never caught. It's all on the internet. Okay then. Maybe I'll take you. Take me, he interrupted. You're coming with me? It's the most logical way. You can get in, but I can't teach you all you need to know about getting out in one afternoon, but what I say goes, and I mean that you take my orders without question while we're there. Daniel didn't like the implications in her words, but he had no option, and it did make sense. You really will take me? Diana began to appreciate how keen he was. And you'll buy the supplies. Supplies? We'll need food, and stuff. Daniel's face showed his reluctance. How much is that going to cost? Not much, she smiled. It was 2 days later Daniel picked up the phone again to hear Diana's excited voice. Gunter's Peak. I know where it is. How? It was all he could think of to say. At the library. In the books on Cairns' early history. But I looked there already. But you were probably trying to find the name of the hills, weren't you? He didn't reply. I searched for people who lived in the area. And you found a Gunter? She suddenly became quieter. Well, not quite. What was his name then? That's the problem. I don't know. You don't know, but you said you'd found Gunter's Peak? I thought you would be excited. I am, but you've not told me anything to get excited about yet. There was a story about a man called the Prussian, who panned a Mulgrave in the late 1800s. He was a recluse and lived in the rainforest. No one ever knew where, other than it was somewhere against a hill at the head of the river. And you think this Prussian's hill is Gunter's Peak? She was disappointed that Daniel was less than convinced. The Germans were called Prussians. It's around the right time, and he lived on a hill. I know it's not much but it's the best either of us has come up with. If he was a recluse, what about Fledermaus? A trace of doubt crept into her voice. Daniel, it was him, or one of them. I'm sure. Even if it was, there's still a lot of bush out there. Where would we start looking? I got a topographical map from the Lands Department. It shows where the Upper Mulgrave joins with another stream. Just the one. Aren't there creeks running into it all along? Yes, but at this one comes down a steep section from a hill, which just happens to be the highest point within a kilometer of the river. The old mining settlements are all overgrown now and not shown on any maps, but Fanning Town was close, and so was Goldsboro. It all fits in with where the Prussian lived. And this is where it gets better. There's a forestry road running from the Gillies Highway to within a few K that follows an old track that was there in the 1800s. Daniel smiled. It was obvious to him that she was convinced. He wished that he could feel the same. It's too late to arrange anything for this weekend. So how about Friday? Next week? He said slowly. She took his hesitation as a sign of impatience. It's dense rainforest. Out there. You need to get some strong boots for a start, and we need to make up packs. There are things to organize. You want my help, trust me to do it my way. You mean go and look for it? Of course, isn't that what we've been talking about? The reality struck him, they were actually going to go. He was going to eat and sleep in the jungle. Of course, he said, hiding his apprehension. Just after you making a big deal about it, I expected a bit longer. Maybe I was a bit over the top, but we don't have to wait any longer. Next week will be fine. She was right, of course, but that didn't mean Daniel had to be happy about the decision. Okay. He agreed doubtfully. Did you get some boots? Not yet. Well, you had better get them soon, and while you're about it you have to get Daniel shrugged his shoulders as he listened to Diana reel off a list of things. This week's wages were as good as gone, and probably some of his savings as well. There had better be treasure there, or I'm broke for the rest of the month, he muttered quietly to himself. It was close to 5 in the afternoon when Diana pulled her car over to the side of the bush track. I don't think I had better go any further, the road is getting too rough. We can walk in from here, she said confidently. They took the packs from the vehicle and walked off together into the rainforest, with Daniel struggling to keep up with his sister. Almost immediately he began feeling tired. How far do we go? We can probably put in close to an hour, and then we'll make camp. Do we have to climb any hills? Not tonight, it's mostly all flat. Is that what the map says? Actually, I've been down this road before. There's a stream close by, we had a camp there, that's where we're heading. Then we can get an early start. As he walked, Daniel continued to have misgivings. They had begun entering his mind several days ago. The week had gone incredibly slowly at first. He waiting in anticipation, while Diana had done most of the planning and gathering of the things they would need. The realization that they would be sleeping under the stars, out in the open, began to sour the excitement for Daniel about Wednesday. From then on, once released, the waves of doubt swarmed over him. How could they find a cave in the dense rainforest, when experienced rescue crews couldn't even find lost walkers? He had visions of the police looking for them too, or being bitten by snakes or falling over cliffs. As the days had passed, he almost sank into the depths of depression, and to think his biggest worry had been finding the cave empty. But for each day that Daniel lost his enthusiasm, Diana's grew. When he had mentioned his fears to her, she had told him that if he didn't, she would go with her friend Lucy, and that they would find the cave, and it would all be theirs. He had to go on. They laid out their sleeping bags under a mosquito net. Daniel had insisted, imagining every insect for kilometers around making straight for him, and that wasn't even considering snakes and spiders. They had bought a takeaway on the way, so Diana just made a small fire for a warm drink and they went to sleep, though more she did. Daniel lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest and her soft snoring, for some time. The smell of bacon tantalized in his dream, drawing him out into the woken world. He became aware of the sounds of bird song even before his eyes opened. Above him the branches at the top of the canopy swayed gently in the breeze, although here at ground level he could feel not a breath of wind. He looked over towards the crackle of dry timber on the campfire. Diana was sat reading, as usual, holding a magazine in one hand, a fork in the other, casually moving the sizzling bacon pieces around a soot-blackened pan. Daniel rolled over onto his elbow. He was warm in the sleeping bag. Morning, Diana. Afternoon. She didn't look up. Is that bacon? No, it's Christmas pudding. He smiled, not offended by the remark. He had never seen her like this before. She seemed so confident, so in control of her environment. He was a city boy, she was a country girl. Mom was right when she said they were oil and water and could never mix, but that didn't mean he couldn't appreciate what a special person she was. Can I do something to help? No, it's all. She stopped and looked at him, her voice softened. I think it's going to rain, you had better get some breakfast, we need to get going soon. Daniel destroyed the embers from the fire. With any luck, by following this stream we should come to the saddle shown on the map, said Diana, tightening the straps of her pack. From there we go bush to the first of the two streams, and back along it to the peak. If it's the right one? That, we'll find out when we get there. The peak with no name? Not that anybody knows of, just a peak and amongst others on the range. But where? We hope the German spent his life panning for gold. That's all we've got. Going back that far, who knows what was real and what was rumor? Doesn't seem much to go on now. Too late to get any more doubts. I guess. The further they left the track behind, the steeper the ground became. And worse, Diana was right, by late morning it had started to rain. It wasn't a heavy rain, but enough when they were out of the shade of the canopy, and almost all the time the lower plants wet them as they brushed by. The undergrowth was becoming very thick, wait a while and lawyer vine everywhere, and several times they had nearly walked into a stinging tree. A little after midday the rain had stopped, although every leaf and frond still carried its own spot of water to deposit upon them. The sound of running water had been getting louder for some time, and Daniel was convinced that a stream was close by, although they could see no sign of it. At last they pushed through a clump of foxtail ferns, and there it was, about 2 meters below them, running through a deep channel, cut over millennia of wet seasons into the soft rock. The foaming water splashed over the smooth multi-gray rocks on its mad rush downhill to join the Mulgrave River, then to be absorbed into the salty waters of the Coral Sea. "We follow the stream from here," said Diana. "How much further is it?" "I'm not sure. It took longer than I'd expected to get this far." Daniel was sure it was because of him, but Diana didn't say it. "We'll go on for another hour and then find a place to camp for the night." "But there's plenty of daylight left. Once we're set up we can look around, but I'm not going to be caught wandering about in the dark trying to find place for the night. I don't want to go back without having time to finding anything. After coming this far I don't want to give up any more than you do. But I don't want to get caught out in the dark." She turned briefly back toward him. "Once the camp is set up we can follow one of the streams for a while and be back before the light goes. If we haven't found anything by then we're not going to." It was considerably more difficult following the moss-lined banks of the stream than it had been walking on the forest floor, and their progress remained slow. It was not until just after Diana's deadline when they came to the joining of the two streams. Here was something of a surprise to them both. They had expected two simple streams converging into one, but although that was what happened it was not a simple merging. The stream they had been following passed through a turbulent pool before disappearing into the forest to their right. The second stream entered the pool from above, cascading down the face of a small cliff. There was a flat gravel area where the wet season's floods would overflow the pool. They stood mesmerized at the sight for some time. "This is ideal, as long as we don't get any more rain." Daniel didn't reply, he was still stunned at the beauty of the place. Diana dropped her pack to the ground. "I'll lay out the sleeping bags, you go and find some kindling to make a fire." It took less than 15 minutes before their camp was as ready as a bush camp could be, and Diana was tying the last of the ropes supporting the canvas sheet over Daniel's sleeping bag as he returned. "Daniel, fill the pannikins now so all we have to do when we get back is heat them." He went to the water's edge to fill the bottles. Before he did he cupped a handful of crystal-clear liquid to his mouth. The chill spread rapidly from his fingers to his lips, and the taste was sweet and pure. He wished instantly that he would never have to drink tap water again. "Well, which way?" Diana stood behind him. "Which way? Up the cliff or along the stream?" "I don't know. He just said go into the stream. It looks too deep for wading. We'll follow alongside along the face for an hour, or if the going's easy maybe more. Hopefully we should find some place that leads to an easier way up the cliff. Not too far though, we don't want to risk climbing back down in the dark." After only a few hundred meters following the stream the two turned into the cliff face, climbing up inside a narrow chasm in a torrent. The water was cold, the current strong, and the bed was a jumble of large rock. Carefully Daniel followed Diana, wading up between the sheer rock faces, very aware that a slip could jam his foot between the hidden boulders. The rocks underfoot were more slippery, and the current stronger than he had thought possible. At last they came to a contained deep pool that could only be crossed by swimming. It was the final straw. They were tired, wet, cold, and extremely disappointed. This was not how they had imagined it would turn out during the excitement of planning. Neither spoke, returning to the campsite. Daniel's nagging doubts had returned. There had been nothing that could be positively or even vaguely identified as any feature shown on the map, be it Gunter's Peak, or anything. The tropical sun had long since passed over the ridge, and the light, as was usual in the tropics, had taken on that quality that indicated that darkness was approaching. As they made their way into the camp, Daniel now gratefully realized the wisdom of his sister's decisions. All that was needed was to apply the match to the paraffin-soaked block, and before they had stripped off their soaked clothes, the fire was blazing. "How will we get up there?" Daniel said, looking skywards. Even after the disappointment, Diana's spirits were still high. "Don't know, somehow, we'll decide in the morning." "Do you think there will be a way?" "We'll get up somehow. We've come too far to turn back without making sure there's nothing there. Time's running out fast. I thought we'd have had plenty." "I know, but whatever we find, or don't find, we have to get back and down to the road before dark. Finding our way out of the forest in the dark is going to be almost impossible, so get some sleep. We need to be ready to start looking for a way up soon after first light." "That early?" "We've only got part of the day. It'll be easier following our tracks back out and downhill, but it's still a long way, so we can't risk searching on past midday, at the latest just after. We could have the wrong stream, you know that?" Daniel voiced something he guessed neither wanted to mention. "Yes, we could, but I'm sure this is the stream marked on the map. So don't put any more doubts in my mind now." "I think it is too. It's all a bit of a guess, really." "Yes, it is, and it was your idea, so don't start doubting yourself now." It started to drizzle again. They sat on their ground sheets cushioned on the mattresses of forest litter Diana had prepared, watching the steady drip of water from the sagging sides of the tarpaulin hung above. Daniel took a deep breath of the air. "Still, whatever we find, it's been good." She looked at him. "Being here?" She smiled, and nodded. "Yes, it has." They ate hot pea soup, almost burning their mouths as they scooped up the thick liquid on wedges of damper. When their plates were empty, they just watched the smoke from the fire as it curled slowly into the dark, clearing sky. It was only when the bright point of light that was Venus flickered through the thinning clouds that Daniel realized the sky was full of birds, though on second thought he realized they weren't birds, they were bats. There were so many pouring into the sky that he couldn't count. He strained his eye into the near blackness, trying to see where they were coming from. Then he saw it was from the waterfall, though it was too dark to be sure. "Diana, look at the..." He stopped. She was already asleep, breathing deeply after the day's exertions. Daniel suddenly felt tired. He looked back up at the sky. The bats flew over like a black cloud. He shrugged his shoulders and slid down into his sleeping bag. Above the canopy, the first rays of sunlight had only just banished the grip of night, creeping slowly across to the west, toward the still dark sky. On the forest floor, the light of dawn had barely reached them as they finished breakfast. Packed and ready to leave when they wanted, they stood across from the base of the waterfall looking up. There were several possible ways they could climb, but none that offered any certain route to the top. "We mightn't have to go back a ways," observed Diana, already turning. "Guess so. There's no way we're going to get up this part of the face." She was climbing over a half-rotted log. "Unless we sprout wings." The reference made him remember. "You should have seen the bats last night." "Bats?" She carried on the conversation with partial interest. "I didn't hear them fighting." "No, not fruit bats, little ones, you know, the common ones. There were thousands over us just after you went to sleep." She had stopped and was looking back at him. "I didn't see any bats." "No, you were asleep. The sky was full of them." Her voice was full of curiosity. "You didn't see where they came from?" "Not for certain, but it seemed as if they came from the waterfall, but it was getting..." A great smile spreading over her face. "How big were they?" "How big?" "They were in the air, and it was getting dark." "But they definitely weren't flying foxes." "No, they were much smaller." Mouse size? They could have been. She looked at him. What fools we've been. Why? All the time we've assumed that Gunter and Fledermaus were both people, yet there was only the one that anybody had ever heard of being in this area. She said with conviction. That's because the other wasn't even human. What are you talking about? Dunbar's wife was to return to Hamburg, so let's assume for the moment that she was German. When he told her about the cave, he didn't tell her its name, he actually told her what it was. Fledermaus. Think of the word Daniel. Say it to yourself. Mouse, mouse, it's got to be, and Fleder, fledgling, flying. I don't know any German, but what if it's their word for bat? Fledermaus Cave would mean just that. The Bat Cave, said Daniel slowly. Exactly, but no Batman. She stared up at the fall. Well, come on, what are you waiting for? She shouted, dropping her pack and was running towards the pool.